And now, a word from our sponsors. The Oyster Recovery Partnership is the nonprofit expert in Chesapeake Bay oyster restoration. Oyster Recovery Partnership has planted more than 9 billion oysters on 3,000 acres of reef and recycled more than 250 bushels of shell. Everyone benefits from a healthy Chesapeake Bay. Poor water quality and declining habitats can be reversed. Oysters are the answer. Pescavore is packaged in a convenient single serving size with no refrigeration required until after opening. Pescavore is the perfect, healthy, and delicious snack for those on the go. Pescavore, tuna that travels. Hey, what's going on, good people? It's Gardner Douglas, your oyster ninja, and thank you for tuning in for another show, another podcast, another listen to. Just two good people on here trying to have a good conversation. Today I got local legend, DMV legend, Philly legend, Pennsylvania legend. He's just a legend in the game. I think we met over social media, probably Facebook, and I just been seeing all the great things he's been part of, and I was like, he needs to be on the podcast. You guys need to know him. So, James, what's going on, man?
Hey, good morning. Good to talk to you. Good to see you Saturday, and always love your podcast.
Well, thank you, man. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for being just a great person in the industry.
Thank you.
So, you are a oyster shucker. You have a shucking service. Tell us a little bit about what you got going on.
Sure. Yeah, I travel all around the Mid-Atlantic area, doing events anywhere from a cocktail hour at a wedding reception to a festival where we need 5 to 15 shuckers. So often I'm asked at an event, where are you from? And I always tell them, what's that got to do with anything? I said, where do you live? What do you need? I'll be there. Then I hold up my knife, which I don't have right now, and I say, you see that? Watch this. Have knife will travel. And yeah, I worked many years with a corporation, and when I put that behind me, I got into shucking more often. And I try to make oyster eating an experience for people. I often use your little saying, and I may not get it exactly right, but you can't make a whole lot of friends serving salads, but you sure can with oysters. And I get a good laugh out of that. And it's the truth. People come up, there's some events, we might be shucking over 1,000 in one day, and some events is 200 to 300. And people walk up to me and say, whoa, isn't oyster shucking hard work? No, I went, nah, I tell them, if it ever becomes hard work, I won't do it. I said, people walk up with a beer in one hand, and all they want is a plate of oysters in the other hand. They come up smiling, send them away smiling. So, it's just fun. You're out with the people. And typically, if you're serving oysters or shucking oysters, I mean, it's a relaxed event. And I've been doing this a long time. And of course, we all had, a 2 to 3 year break in there with the pandemic. And now that things are opening back up again, it's just wonderful to be out. I mean, it could be a, event outside or an event inside. And, back when I started shucking back in the 80s, it was you were in the back room of a hall. You threw your oysters on the table, and typically you made a mess, and then you cleaned up afterwards. But now, there's some finesse to it, and you have to kind of re-educate some people as to what oyster shucking these days is all about. And I always tell people, I'll come set up in your kitchen, and you won't even know I was there when I'm all done. And so. It's about customer service, and it's about enjoying what you do. And it's really kind of a small industry. Everybody knows everybody. Other oyster shuckers, whether it's folks like yourself down the DC area, or people up in southern Pennsylvania or Baltimore or whatever. And then you get to work with these oyster farmers, and every oyster farmer just about knows another oyster farmer. And then you work with seafood wholesalers and restaurateurs and whatnot. And it's a good industry, and it's really a small group. Everybody knows everybody, more or less.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, that's how I always describe it, as being like a family reunion when we finally get together. Um, so let's just go back to the beginning, man. Why did you want to learn how to shuck in the 1980s, or start shucking? Like, why did you get started?
I actually started back in the 70s, and I did it to pay my way through college. Um, I, back in those days, taking out a college loan and going in debt and all that kind of thing, and or your parents paying your way, and it wasn't, at least it wasn't my world. But I wanted to make it through college, and how are you going to do that? Well, you work every day after school, and you work on the weekends, and you work full time in the summer, and you save your money and you pay your way through. And so, I was able to pay my way through college. I worked at a place called Larkin's Seafood, which is no longer around. Jack has passed, but his whole family was in the seafood business for years. Back in the 70s, I worked about 5 or 6 years right on Utah Street, one block from Lexington Market. And that's how I started out. And it wasn't just oyster shucking. I mean, it was working the retail store. It was driving the truck. It was cutting hundreds of pounds of fish each day. Plus learning how to shuck oysters and clean soft crabs and just everything. And once I got through college, then I got a job with a corporation that I stayed with for decades. And towards the end of my career with that corporation, I got back into oyster shucking again. We did it when I was a single guy, every weekend, fun stuff in the 80s, and then raised a family and whatnot. And I don't know, 15 years ago or so, 10 years ago, I got back into it. And now, it's just, it's a thing that keeps me pretty daggone busy. But that's how I really learned it. Working for a seafood industry, a seafood market. And back in those days, the seafood market was actually on Market Street right there in downtown Baltimore. And now it's down in Jessup, but back in those days, it's where Port Discovery is now in downtown Baltimore. That was the original seafood market. And back in those days, that's where we went and got seafood, and then we ended up selling it or cutting it or whatever and selling it retail and wholesale. So learned the seafood industry years ago, and still some people from back then that I still kind of know and stay in touch with.
And how has oyster shucking changed over the years?
It's not, the sloppy throw your oysters on the table and mop up the floor when you're all done. And, it's just finessed. Back when I started shucking, we didn't have, a stainless steel pan and some kind of way to collect the water and the juices that run off of the oysters as you're shucking. You just threw the oysters on the table, and you had your block of wood and sitting next to you with some paper plates, and you shucked onto a paper plate. And now, I tell people, I said, I'll come to your kitchen and set up, and when it's all said and done, you won't even know I was there. And so it's been refined. People kind of chuckle. I have business cards, and most of my references and most of my jobs that I get are usually from me, networking and handing out business cards. And on my business card, my title is Professional Oyster Shucker. And people go, oh, professional oyster shucker. Well, yeah, we are professionals, and we approach it professionally. And when I set up an event, people ask me, what does it cost to have you come? And there's no, just flat rate. You have to tell me about your event. Tell me how many people, what are you looking for? What kind of oysters? What kind of sauces? Is it a wedding reception? Is it Is it just a birthday party? Is it a festival where we need 5 shuckers? And so, I think today, back in the day, back in the 80s, I mean, you would show up, I would show up, and you'd be always working typically for caterers. And a caterer would have a bull and oyster roast, although they still call them bull and oyster roast, but very seldom do you see roasted oysters. Although I have a wonderful menu, a wonderful recipe for roasted oysters in case anybody's interested, which I think I snatched up from Orchard Point Oyster Company. But so it's refined, and we go out here and we're professionals, and we tailor what we do according to what the customer needs. It could be sometimes shucking in a pub where you're shucking multiple oysters, and you have to make the arrangement on the plate the way someone would want it in a restaurant or a pub. Or it could be as simple as shucking a half a dozen oysters onto a paper plate in the Knights of Columbus Hall. So, I think those of us who are professionals, and most of the shuckers in our industry are, we've raised the bar, I'll say.
No, I always try to, differentiate, a professional oyster shucker and just not, I don't want to say random or plain oyster shucker, but like there's a difference what we bring to the table, as far as quality, as far as the educational portion of it, just different aspects of what we bring to the table and the experience that we provide. And that's what I think it's all about, is the experience.
And you've got to, adjust what you do and how you do it according to the event and what the customer wants. For instance, sometimes I shuck oysters at Camden Yards. I think you've in the past shucked oysters at Nats Park. And so that's a different situation than, if you're somebody's private party or at a bull and oyster roast. And of course, working there is fun too. I worked there when I do work there for Harris Creek Oyster Company. I have to tell you a little funny thing. So typically I'm always behind the table, I'll say, serving the oysters, and my friends and I, we got together at the end of February. We actually went to an event in Baltimore County where I was in front of the table actually being served. And I ran into a gentleman who I know from Camden Yards. And so I was shooting a breeze with him, and he was serving the beef and whatnot. And a friend, and Scott Buttermeyer, he was over there shucking and whatnot. So this man gives me a jab. He says, they got real shuckers over there, not like the shuckers at Camden Yards. So you just have to enjoy what you do.
So I'm sure over your time you've probably ran into some celebrities. Any celebrity stories?
Actually, the quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson, in 2019, when Lamar was early in his career, the Orioles walked Lamar around Camden Yards about 4:30 before the gates opened. And that was the year that the Orioles tried to have local foods and local restaurants and local breweries serving the food at Camden Yards. So they wanted to make a little video with Lamar walking around trying all these different foods. So at that time, again, I was working for Harris Creek Oyster Company, and they had us based right at Gate H, below the Budweiser deck. So I don't know how many places Lamar had eaten before that, but they walked Lamar up, and they got a film crew with him, and we had oyster fritters and Cajun catfish and crab cakes. And so Lamar trying all that, he loved it. Well, we had Harris Creek oysters that day, and we had some Virginia oysters. I'm a little bit partial to briny oysters, so I thought, and Lamar was up for trying a raw oyster, so he did. I shucked him one, and he tried it, and I don't think it went down. And he turned around. And the film crew said, we won't put that on there. But he turned around and came back to me and looked right at me. He says, that tastes like the sea. I went, well, yeah, Lamar. So
That's
yeah,
what they do. Yeah.
and then I've shucked oysters for Boot Pal. I was there again, probably the same year, and this man comes up, and I'm looking at him, and he was younger than Boot, but he spit an image, and he ordered some oysters, and I said, "Man, you look a lot like Boot Pal." He said, "There's a good reason. I'm his son." So that year, I had the 13 game season ticket plan, and about 2 nights later, I wasn't working the booth. I took my son to the game, and there was Boog at his stand. And so we're walking down Utah Street inside the ballpark, and I walked past Boog. I said, "Hey, Boog, how'd you like those oysters the other night?" So we struck up a conversation, and I said, "Well, you stop up anytime, Boog, and I'll take good care of you."
There you go, man. That's what it's all about, man. Honestly, just having a good time, um, getting everybody else to have a good time. Like you said, they come up with a beer in one hand, all they want is some oysters in the other. So that's what
That's
it's
it.
all about. Making
Yeah,
those connections.
that's it. And you just you got to enjoy what you're doing. If you don't, you might as well find something else to do.
Might as
And the
well.
oyster shucking is fun, and being out with the people is fun, and yeah, so it's all good, and
So
I'm happy and blessed.
there we go. Let's talk about the other side of oyster shucking, the recycling part. I know you've been kind of like a big part of the show recycling, with oyster recovery and those type of things. Why is that so important to you?
Well, certainly I don't have all the scientific knowledge that others might have, but I know that if we don't get the shells back to the bay, we won't have oysters. I mean, that's as basic as it is. And so I am very passionate about recycling the shells, and I get quite bothered if the shells aren't recycled at a particular event. So, um, but the way I explain it, and the layman's understanding that I have is that the shells are needed for the oyster larvae to attach to, which becomes spat on shell. And I've attended some seminars recently, webinars with Oyster Recovery Partnership, and they went into it in more depth. And those webinars are probably available on their website. And I'm actually planning a road trip with some buddies of mine, and we're going to go down to Cambridge to Horn Point and tour the laboratory, and then tour about 3 different oyster farms on the Eastern Shore. But I guess I've kind of known this, but recently through that webinar, that the shells are sent back to Cambridge, and they're let sit outside for upwards of a year to have the weather clean them off. And then they bring them in the laboratory to clean them again, and then mix them with the larvae in a controlled environment. I guess in some cases they might crush the shells and mix shell pieces with larvae. In other cases, they may just take the shells and replenish the floor of the bay, or just build it up. I do a lot of work with Scott Button at Orchard Point Oyster Company, and I spoke with him recently, and I know he's working with the University of Maryland to try to come up with a man-made oyster shell, because shells are in such demand. And wherever I travel around, I'm always trying to educate people as well on why it's so important to recycle the oyster shells. Again, I travel from Maryland's Eastern Shore, Northern Virginia, DC, Baltimore, even Southern Pennsylvania. I was doing a job outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, about a month ago. And, those folks up there, they had no clue about oyster shell recycling. And it was a hall of 200 men in American Legion. And if I had one conversation, I had 20, about why it's so important. And I have white buckets, and I have a marked shells only. I have the ORP sticker on them. And it's a good thing my wife doesn't walk around the other side of the garage, because I usually have several thousand shells stacked up there. Funny thing was, I was on a cabin trip with my sons back in November, and I did roast some oysters over an open fire, and put cheese and bacon and all that kind of thing on it. Well, I brought those shells back in a bag. Sometimes you get oysters in a box, sometimes in a bag. You were talking about your dog earlier. So my dog always lays up on the driveway by the road. And this, for like 2-3 days straight, she's going around the back of the house and staying there. I'm like, what's up with this dog? What? And turns out she had found that bag with still the bacon and cheese bits kind of forged to the shells from roasting them. And she had shells spread out in the backyard. She was having a party.
She was living her best life, having her own oyster roast.
So shell recycling is very, very important. And, we just have to keep doing our best to educate. And, I've always even offered to ORP to help try to get something going in York County, Pennsylvania. I grew up in Baltimore County, Maryland, but right now living in just over the line in York County. And we have a need up here to do more shell recycling. So ORP knows that I'm available to help. And wherever I can do my part, I'm going to keep doing it.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate that. As we say in the military, thank you for your service. But no, it really is a service because, as you know, I mean, a lot of people really don't, know about shell recycling. And I would say when I first started shucking oysters, one of my biggest questions was like, what's the difference between oysters? Now, the biggest question is, well, what do you do with the shells? That's the biggest question that people ask. Cause they just want to know, they really want to know, they care. And also, part of my social media plan is to educate people about shell recycling. So no, I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mentioned the event up in Harrisburg area, but even sometimes on the Eastern Shore or in Baltimore, where you think that people would understand why shell recycling is so important, they typically don't. So, I mean, it's enjoyable to not only serve oysters and keep that smile on somebody's face, but it's very enjoyable to talk to people about shell recycling and why that's so important. And maybe we'll convert one person to understand more about shell recycling that didn't know before. So we just, those of us that are in the industry and can get the message out, we just, keep carrying the flag and letting people know how important it is.
All right. So not to put you on the spot, but do you have a favorite brand of oysters?
Well,
so I'm being the
farmer,
customer now. So
yeah, no problem. When I'm working for an oyster farmer, I love your oysters. If you're farmer XYZ, I love you. If you're farmer A, and quite honestly, the oyster farmers and aquaculture is just growing and growing. And these oyster farmers, wherever they are based, whether they're in Maryland and Eastern Bay Area or Chester River, or whether they're, down on the lower stretches of the Virginia Peninsula, they put a lot of passion and hard work into their oysters, as well as, oyster fishermen who do wild catch. I mean, those who are catching the oysters in the industry, God bless them all. And we wouldn't be here without the ladies and the men that work hard to bring us the oysters out of the water. So I myself, I'm partial to a briny oyster. And but at the same time, if you get an oyster out of that Chester River, Eastern Bay, even down where the local oyster and True Chesapeake grows their oysters, I think it's St. Jerome's Creek. There's some very tasty oysters. So, another thing, you talked about shell recycling, but a lot of times people don't understand that the oysters taste like the water they're grown in. Whether it's that sweet, buttery Maryland oyster that's farm raised, or whether it's that really briny, tidal Virginia oyster, or whether it's something from Prince Edward Island. A couple of years back, I went out with a buddy of mine and we went to some ballparks on the West Coast followed the Orioles around, and we were traveling down the Pacific coast, and we stopped in Encinitas, and we had some Baja Mexico oysters. Very different taste. So it's fun to taste the oysters from different areas.
How would you describe those Baja Mexico oysters?
They actually had a bit of a metallic taste. They were very interesting. They were good, but different. And then I've talked to other people that are like from the Pacific Northwest, that they swear by, like, those oysters. I don't. So it's all in taste, and then you've got people that only want blue points, only want Malpacs. To me, I'm happy with a good tasty oyster that my customers are happy with.
I always give the spill about blue points, so I won't get on that soapbox today, but a portion of it is, I'm like, blue points are good, but they aren't consistent. So what I like to say is I deal with Cops Island. They're blue point oysters, but it's from a specific company. And I know those oysters are always going to be consistent. So the thing that I don't like about blue point is, everybody and anybody can throw their name on a blue point oyster and say it's a blue point oyster. Now, whether, they just doing it for marketing or just trying to sell oysters because they know people like blue point oysters, is whatever. That's beyond me. But I always say I like Cops Island, which happened to be a blue point oyster.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's just that. And the same thing with Malpacs. I just tell people, when you're eating oysters, just think about the flavor profile. Don't really think about the name. The name is good because the next time you come around, you can say, hey, yeah, I like those oysters. But once you like a salty oyster from, the Damariscotta River, or a sweet oyster from the Rappahannock River, any oyster in that region, and if you ask your oyster shucker, they should be able to tell you where they're from. You should be pretty happy with what you get.
Yeah, I agree. I just recently got some oysters from Whitestone Oyster Company, which are Rappahannock oysters, and they were very tasty. We had an event, my friends and I got together, and they were very tasty oysters.
So after your shucking story is done, what do you want to be known for? Because I think you are a great pillar in the oyster shucking community. What would you like to be known for?
Oh, maybe a smile and serving good oysters in a way that people can really enjoy them. I if you go on my Instagram page or my Facebook page, you'll see some of my setups, and I'd like to make it an experience. So I'd like people to think that, what, when Jim Thiess was serving oysters at that event, boy, they were really neat. They tasted great, and we really liked his display. I just recently enhanced my display for this private party I did Saturday night. A few years back, I found this boat, and the lady actually used it as a photography prop, and she would put children in it as kind of a setting to take a picture. But the thing has a thin galvanized insert, and I looked at that. I might have found it on Facebook Marketplace, and I went, "Oh my gosh, that's perfect!" It'll fit right on the table. So I drove down to Annandale, Virginia, and got it from the lady, and I modified it so it had a drain plug in it and all this kind of thing. But I've been thinking about, because when I see displays on Instagram of different people, whether it's they have a little shelf with the hot sauces in it, or netting, or a little buoy here. Oh, that's cool. You can't add too much. But so I think I saw somebody with, it looked like the ice was lit. So I found these waterproof LED lights, and I put them on the inside of the boat just adjacent to where the ice goes. And as they lowered the lights at this party Saturday evening, it just looked great. And so, what would I like to be known for? Someone who, hey, if you want to get a good oyster and you want to have fun doing it, go see Jim Thiess.
That's awesome, man. Love it.
And sometimes, especially like last fall, I mean, again, coming on the back end of the pandemic, it got really busy. And so, there were days where more jobs would come in than I could personally cover. And so, I know, and I work with a whole group of professional shuckers like yourself. And so when the volume of work picks up, I'll reach out to a fellow professional shucker and see if they're available, she or he, and so that we get our customers satisfied, and the same thing happens with fellow shuckers that I work with. They'll give me work as well. So I guess that's how I'd like to be remembered, but I don't see myself slowing down anytime soon.
No,
People say you're busy. I said, no, I'm not busy. I said, when I worked for a corporation for years and years and years, I was busy. Right now I'm active. So
there you go.
I'm going to stay active, and oyster shucking and having fun serving oysters is part of my planned activity for years to come, if the Lord be willing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. But the thing about it is, I don't know if you know it, but I used to work in the shucking house in Chicotee. And I promise you, like, there were people, they had to be in their high 80s. You know what I mean? They were still shucking strong, 80s.
I believe it.
And I mean, it was just, of course, I was the youngest person. I would say the next youngest person probably been in their early 60s. It was that much of a gap. I was in my 20s then. But just to see the longevity, and what's funny is maybe this generation is just different and or soft or whatever you want to call it. But I'm just thinking to myself, like, man, my back hurts. Oh, my knees hurt, my ankles hurt, my hands hurt. Like, I'm like, how in the heck are these, the people who I remember shucking in their, 80s, 70s, and 80s, how were they still going so strong? But I guess, you do what you got to do, honestly. That's just the matter of it.
Yeah, and you have to, stay at it, because if you get away from it, you might be more sore after an event, or, your pace may slow down. But yeah, you're right. I mean, but those folks there, they knew the industry in and out, and it's always good to run into some people like that. And I know last summer I got to meet your dad, and I know he's got deep roots in the seafood industry, so it was good to meet him as well. And I've heard you say, share a little bit about your past growing up in that Virginia area. I think back, to when I did go through college, and if I had to do it all over again, I would probably study something, marine biology or something like that, and would have spent my years in working, on the water more. Spent a lot of time on the water, recreationally, and still do when I can. But it's always enjoyable to get down to Chicotee or Chrisfield, Cambridge or Chestertown, or over to Rock Hall or St. Michael's. I mean, it's just, I remember years ago, I was going down to camp at James Island State Park, and we took my little boat out in Tanger Sound trying to get some trout. And, back in, and this probably goes back to the 70s. And where, there wasn't a retail store in Chrisfield, because why would they need a retail store? It's the seafood capital of the world. People have their own seafood. So we're trying to find some soft crabs to cook over the campfire. And we found the door open at a sloughing house, and we walked in, and oh my goodness, here are these whale soft crabs. And we found somebody in there, and they're doing wholesale and boxes and boxes and crates. Well, we ended up getting enough for ourselves, and they sold them to us, and we got some. But I make myself hungry thinking about this soft crabs cooked over open fire.
Well, 'tis the season right now, right? For soft
It
crabs
is, yeah.
coming.
JJ McDonald's is advertising right now that they've got soft crabs available.
Oh, I'm gonna have to hit them up for sure. Did you want to share your grilled recipe, or is that top secret?
Well, no, it's not really. I just some salted butter. You could use unsalted butter and a little sriracha sauce, and then shuck the oysters in the cup, and then you can do it over a gas grill or right over hot coals over a campfire, and let the oyster kind of cook in its own juice in the cup of the shell, and mix in a little and you can do any kind of seasoning.
Come on, man. You're killing me now. Come on, man.
Yeah.
You're
Well,
killing
and then
me.
a little bacon bits and a little shredded cheese. And it only, I mean, if you're doing it over hot coals or a grill that's a gas grill that's hot, it might take only 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And annually, my friends and I, we go away the first weekend of March, and we either do a backpacking trip or we go to a cabin. And so I must have grilled 150 oysters that way for my buddies and I, and you eat them like peanuts at that point. But part of that recipe I recently picked up from Scott Button with Orchard Point when we were doing a wedding reception for a buddy of his. So, yeah, a little salted butter, maybe a little sriracha sauce, some bacon bits, and shredded cheese, and you can add whatever you want from there. But they'll go down mighty smooth when you cook them that way. Matter of fact, I think I'm making myself hungry now.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you taking time and finally joining the podcast. I've had a bunch of interruptions. Hopefully this audio comes out pretty good with the puppy in the background, and then my daughter home today. Well, maybe it'd be the same thing for the listeners, but I appreciate you. Where can the listeners find you next? And do you have any like steady gigs you do, or how can they find you?
Well, you can find me on Instagram, Thiess Shucking Services. That's T as in Thomas, HIESS. Same thing on Facebook. My phone number is listed there. My email address. I don't have a website, but pick up the phone and give me a call. And if I hook up with Harris Creek, you'll find me at some Oriole games. Matter of fact, if you go to the Jimmy's Famous Seafood opening day Orioles tailgate party, I'll see you there. But look me up and let's eat some oysters and have some fun together.